Now, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you're listening and watching. This is the second podcast that we're recording on behalf of LFC Delaware. And the one thing that we noticed that we didn't do the first time through was actually introduce who's on the call. So we're going to go around everybody today, and they're going to introduce themselves. One of the other things we're going to ask them to do is just to say a little bit about how they've been doing with social distancing and what perhaps their favorite thing has been they've been able to do with everything that's been going on. So I'm going to start from my perspective to my right with Sean, and you're up.
Okay. I'm Sean. I live in Newark, Delaware. I'm a member of the club. I don't get to too many games, but Paul brought up this idea for the podcast, and I thought it was a good one. So we're giving it a shot. As far as the social distancing, I've actually been handling it better than I would have thought. Part of that's because I have two little girls. I'm getting to spend a lot more time with them. It's hard to get much work done, but as a result, I'm just focusing more on them and sort of enjoying that aspect of it. So far it's okay for me.
Hey, my name's Charlie. I'm an expat Aussie, now living on the east coast of the US, out of Delaware Liverpool Supporters Club for, I guess, about 18 months or so now. Just enjoying doing this podcast. A little bit something different in a time where there's not a whole lot different. Look, I'm enjoying spending time with the kids. I'm actually enjoying turning a little bit away from technology. I've completely abandoned Twitter because it just annoys me. Too many people with stupid opinions, so forget it.
About this then.
Then at least I can air my stupid opinions and not have to listen to anyone telling me what an idiot I am. So this works for me.
We could do that in the Facebook group, though.
Yeah, and we tend to.
I don't know what order we're going in. Hi, I'm Tim. Timmy K, if you're familiar with any of our social media things. Tim Kaiser, if you live in the real world. So I've been a member for just about a year now of LFC Delaware. The whole social distancing thing for me is absolutely no change whatsoever, really, because both my wife and I are pretty severe introverts. So most days of the week we would sit at home on the couch and watch television and not really go outside at all. And so now we've been sitting on the couch watching television and not going outside at all. So it's pretty much like any other day, except you have to wash your hands a lot when you come home from the grocery.
Our special guest today is Gary Finney. Gary, want to say a little bit about what you've been doing in social distancing?
You just actually took my first line off me there, Paul. I was going to say, hello, my name's Gary.
Sounds like you got there anyway.
Yeah, eventually. Social distancing wise, I won't lie, has probably hit me quite hard because normally I'm around a lot of people. And for the first few days, it's kind of heaven because you've got no people coming to you asking you to do things. And it's great until, you realize that you are actually quite alone. And I think, as Charlie said, you look at social media, which influences a lot of things that you do, and your opinions and what you watch. And then you realize that there's a lot of almost propaganda out there, misinformation, speculation, things being posed as fact when they're perhaps not. So like Charlie, I've taken a step away from an awful lot of stuff. I've started reading more. I've realized that I'm really bad at FIFA 20, so I stopped playing that. And yet kind of overindulged on LFC TV, to the point when, Jamie walks into the lounge and sees it's on again, kind of shakes her head and walks back out. So yeah, interesting times.
Cool. And I guess what I should have done up front was to say I'm Paul Gaskell. I guess I'm chairperson, I think that's the right expression, of LFC Delaware. And for me, actually, there are two highlights of things that have been happening in this past couple of weeks. One is the opportunity to do this kind of was much more interesting. I always kind of thought it was, always talked about podcasts and thought it was a bit more daunting than perhaps it is. And the other is just the opportunity to kind of walk around our neighborhood where there are very few people out, and kind of just spend time outside in a sort of very tranquil, like almost unreal experience. So I'm actually hoping to keep that up once things return to normal, whenever that is. But maybe we'll do the same with the podcasts.
Sounds good.
So we're going to talk about a few different things today. We're going to get Gary to talk about his Liverpool story, about how he became a Liverpool fan and what it means to him. We're going to cover a couple of topics that, if you read our bulletin last week, that we were covering. And then kind of for the final segment, we're going to talk about a few topics that have come up on Facebook, and almost certainly we'll get to talk about Adam Lallana.
Oh,
and perhaps the question is,
fun.
why does he divide opinions so much? Anyway, so that's in our hopefully half an hour today. And hopefully, Tim, you're keeping track of me, because I have no idea where we're up to in terms of timing already. So let's, one of the things that I wanted to touch on actually is yesterday afternoon, we hosted what we called a watch party. And I know that Gary and Tim were there. What were your thoughts about how that worked in terms of engaging our community?
From my perspective, I thought it was actually really, really good. Being a bit, I know this might sound hard to believe, but I am actually quite shy. So when it comes to coming into Rooney's and you see of people that you think you recognise, or you think you know the names and faces, but you're too afraid to go, hey, and then get the wrong name and things like that. I think from that perspective, it's really, really good to get people familiar with other people, personalities and things like that. So I think it's only positive.
Cool.
Yeah, I thought it was funny how it was termed a watch party, and the game kind of became not even secondary. That was kind of like because it was a game we already knew the outcome of, so that probably detracted a bit from it that way. But it seemed to be, especially we talked about like social distancing, people just seemed to relish the idea of being able to get to talk to each other again. So that's why later on today we're doing just like a online happy hour. Not even going to pretend that we're going to try to watch a game. So,
so I think if we're going to continue to do it, the one thoughts I had, and I'd be interested in perspectives, is that it'd be helpful to have some content, but I'm not sure that for whatever reason a game is like quite the right content.
Right.
And someone this morning actually reached out to me and said that they would be happy to create a quiz as some content. So I said, sure, let us know how it's going to look. So maybe next weekend we could do a quiz as part of the content.
Sounds great.
Okay. I'm gonna move on quickly and do a public service announcement. You may have seen, and we'll try to remind everyone on every platform that we've got a fundraiser, and the fundraiser is primarily for staff at Rooney's who effectively are kind of displaced right now because all of the bars and restaurants, as I'm sure everyone knows, are closed, and as a tempter to contribute towards the fundraiser, we have the James Milner signed and framed shirts, which somebody observed yesterday that I already had it on my wall. It actually isn't on the wall. It's just leaning against the wall. So it's available to some lucky person who wins. But if that's what it takes as an incentive for people to go out there and contribute, that would be terrific. We're already halfway over the target that we set, and it's only been running for a couple of days. So please check that out. Moving on. Let's come back to some of the other topics if we've got time at the end, because I think it probably makes sense to get in more to talking about, I guess, what ought to be our kind of number one topic, which is the Mighty Reds. So I'm going to turn it over to Gary and to ask him to share with us his story of how he first became a Liverpool fan and what kind of some of his compelling memories are.
Oh God, how long are we staying on for?
2 hours top.
We'll cut you off. It's okay.
So I was having to think about this earlier on today, actually, and my earliest memory is I used to have a scrapbook. Do you remember those?
Yes.
And Timmy, don't be like that. You know what a scrapbook is. And I remember it would have been the 84-85 season. Last season in the Umbro kit, which the kit that inspired this year's kit, actually. And I remember cutting out press cuttings from the Liverpool Echo and putting them in a scrapbook. And I, for the life of me, I can't remember why I was doing it. Probably encouraged by my dad. And I just remember having this scrapbook. And then I think it would have been 21st of September 1985. I know this because I've just recently bought the program from a program seller a couple of days ago of my first ever game. It was actually away at Goodison. It was a Liverpool derby. Quite why we decided to go to Everton, I have no clue. But obviously, it was not, in the away end, in the Liverpool end. And we went to watch. I think from memory, we won 3-2. And for the rest of the season, it was. In the days when you could go and pay on the gate. I think it was £2.50 to get into the Cop and, £4.50 for the Kemlyn Road, which is now the Kenny Dalglish stand, I think, from memory. So it kind of snowballed from there. So rest of 85, 86, we went to most games. We'd never made it to the final that year. We went to the FA Cup semi-final at White Hart Lane versus Southampton, where I remember getting pelted with coins from the Southampton fans, which was nice. Come back with quite a lot of money from that. And yeah, we just we applied for season tickets that year, got season tickets that year, and followed Liverpool virtually home and away probably until I think probably around about 1991. So Wembley every year. First time I went to Wembley was 1987, which would have been the Littlewoods Cup final, which is the League Cup. And I remember two things perplexed me about this game, actually. The first one was Liverpool played in a black pair of shorts because there was a kit clash with Arsenal. And it bamboozled my mind because you couldn't buy them. And it was a question that I had with my dad, because I had the yellow kit, I had the white kit, I had the red kit, I had the tracksuit top, I had the tracksuit bottoms, but I didn't have these black shorts. And it really bothered me. So I kind of went into the final being a bit bothered on the day, really happy to be at Wembley. And sure enough, Charlie Nicholas scores. I think he scored 2 actually, but Rushy scored, and my dad said to me, he said, "Don't worry, son." He said, "We always win when Rushy scores," and we didn't.
That was the first time, right? Liverpool.
That was
Lost a game.
That was the first time, and then obviously 88 Wimbledon. John Aldridge missing a penalty. That was another absolute mess. 1989 was obviously poignant for different reasons, and then I don't really know what happened with going to the game. My father lost his job, and I think, in all honesty, Hillsborough had a lot to do with a change in attitude as well. The game was going through some massive changes at that time, and although I've never spoke to them about it, I don't think my mum was too happy with me going to the game at that point. So I kind of almost fell out of love with football for a while, kind of on the periphery until probably later in the 90s, actually, whereby I started, really taking an interest again. watching as many games as I could, getting to as many games as I could, which I don't do anymore because I travel an awful lot. But yeah, and I never remember there being a choice of any other football club. I never remember there being a choice of liking football or not. Being from Merseyside, as I'm sure that you can relate to, Paul, you either like football, you're red or blue, or you're basically a social leper. You know, you don't fit in anywhere.
Yeah.
And obviously, being a red, the interesting thing is these days is people have a natural born hatred towards Manchester United. I don't. My natural born hatred is to Everton, because in the 80s, they were a very, very, very good team. When we didn't win the league, they won the league, for example. So my natural born hatred is towards Everton and everything Everton.
Interesting. Yeah.
Which is funny. I don't know if you watched the first episode that we did, but Charlie actually had said that he's not really that, he doesn't feel one way or the other about Everton a lot, but United is the one that he really hates. Or is that just the fans?
Well, my point there was that at least with Everton, you know, and particularly as it relates to Hillsborough, I don't think you'll find Everton fans who are going to sledge you about such a horrible, you know, situation. Whereas Man United fans, it's almost like they don't, you know, as two Merseyside teams, you have more in common, and it's a good, intense rivalry. But I don't see the bitterness, at least from my side. There's no real bitterness between myself and Everton, but United, absolutely there is, you know, and there's no, you know, all's fair in love and war with Manchester United, whereas Everton, there seem to be some ground rules. But hey, I visited Liverpool. I never lived there, so you know, you and Paul are probably better.
Sadly, that has evolved over the years to you know, locally they are known as the Bitters, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And that has evolved over the years, and I firmly believe it's probably a lack of education, because the one thing I do remember about the 1989 Cup final is all of the fans in unison singing Merseyside. Which I doubt would happen these days, but it was a defiant atmosphere, rarely defined.
So, Gary, I'm not sure you were clear. You were actually at Hillsborough?
Yes. Yeah.
Not to get too far into it, but just wanted to clarify for the recording.
So 1988, we played Nottingham Forest at Hillsborough. I was at that game. And 1989 was basically almost a replay of the 1989 game. So, you know, everybody naturally presumed it would all go off absolutely fine, which obviously history proves that it didn't.
You had said earlier, Gary, before we started recording, there was a piece that you'd recommend that people looked at.
Yeah, definitely. I'll need to double check on the actual web address. I think it's contrast.org, and it basically gives the full story of Hillsborough. And for me, it's essential reading for new fans, old fans. It really does give you a true perspective of the failings that led up to the disaster. So I think let's get that out on the webpage.
Awesome. Yeah. So one thing, signposting, we anticipate somewhere in time for the Hillsborough anniversary, 31st anniversary. We'll be doing we'll be devoting more time in one of these podcasts to that topic. I actually had one other question for you, Gary, which was, what is your, so I had this question asked a lot on places like the Anfield Wrap, but it's kind of interesting to me. What do you make of this current team versus some of the other teams that you've had the privilege of watching? What do you rate them?
It's a difficult one because the game has changed. The game has very, very, very much changed tactically. even the quality of pitches and things like that. If you watch even only 10 years ago how bad the Anfield pitch was, it changed the way you play the game. I think in terms of out and out quality, I think it's difficult to compare apples with apples because you're now dealing with a bunch of elite athletes, whereas in the 80s you had Jan Molby sat in the middle, who was quite a portly chap, but proved the old adage, let the ball do the work. The way I look at it is I will refuse to compare this team to teams of the 80s until they've had a sustained run. So I honestly think this team has got to prove itself. Now, you could argue it already has with winning a European Cup. But for me, without wanting to sound cliche, for me growing up, it was always the league. I could leave European competition. Now, whether that's because I really started taking notice and I was too young to appreciate Heysel and we had the ban, so I wasn't brought up on European football until, really my first experience was 2005. We had the UEFA Cup in 2001, but we all recognised that wasn't the European Cup and it was a stepping stone. Yeah. So for me, I'll judge this team next year, if that makes sense. I think that the way they've gone about business this year, current events withstanding, shows that they are on an upward trajectory. If you compare them to the 13-14 team, 13-14 team seemed to be a rabbit in headlights. They couldn't believe the situation they were in. They'd just kind of gone out, started playing football, started winning, and it was kind of like, right, I think was it 14 straight wins we needed to stay on an even keel with City or something like that. Yeah. And it was kind of like, right, and then you kind of get, 4 wins in, 5 wins in, 6 wins in, you think, we might be able to do this here. And then you kind of came to the end of it, and, we jittered against Chelsea. I believe we were set up incorrectly. We panicked. Crystal Palace, absolute hash. And then we took it down to the final game. And we didn't build upon that. Now, last year, you could sense that there was a change in how the team were going about business, how they were going out and smashing teams, but then they'd have the odd off day. And my thought was, running City so close last year, were they going to run out of steam this year? Had they given their all? And the fact that Klopp didn't strengthen in the summer said something to me. And it was kind of like, okay, let's see what happens here. And this year, for me, they've managed games, where sometimes at 2-1, they haven't had to go out and smash another team and go and get another goal. They've even going 1 goal down, they manage the game. And it's a mentality thing. I know Klopp is famous for calling the team mentality monsters. And this, for me, is why I can see something evolving here with this team. And that's why I don't want to judge them just yet. Yeah. Because I think he's got to make a few changes in the close season when we eventually get there, because we have a very, very good front three. But when they don't fire, they don't fire. Right. Goals don't come from anywhere else. And if you block out the Trent and Robbo, we kind of struggle with creativity. I think watching this team evolve and seeing what happens over summer and seeing how we get on next year, whether we can sustain this, my personal feeling, that's when we can start comparing it to the great Liverpool sides. Of probably my barometer is probably a toss-up between the 86 double winning side and probably the team that started to evolve with Barnes and Beardsley, 88, 89, 90.
Yeah. Just as an aside, that 86 team, apparently Hansen before the start of the season said it was the worst Liverpool side he'd ever played in.
Yeah, he did. I believe he went out for a meal with Kenny Dalglish and told him he was going to win nothing.
Yeah.
There's a couple of interesting points you make there, Gary. One of the 13-14 team, it was very odd in that we were actually pretty terrible defensively. I mean, and for us to win that many games, it's, I think it's just a matter of everything kind of coming together at the same time. We had so much attacking talent that just all kind of blossomed together at the same time. Suarez and Sturridge was healthy, and Coutinho kind of was coming of age, and you had sort of Gerrard in the back there. But I'd say, like, I don't know, over the last year to year and a half, there's this like feeling that I was used to having as a supporter that like a 1-goal lead was like never enough. You were like paranoid that we were going to give up a 90th minute goal or something. And I think it'd been probably since Rafa was a manager. Like, it's just over time we were never defensively sound. And this year I think, we were the best defensive team in the league. So that's a huge difference to me from where we were, in 13-14 especially, but it's been at least 10, 12 years that you could feel that way about the team. So
I think it's heavily connected with recruiting the right players as well, because you mentioned Benitez and before him Houllier as well, whereby the turning point was Salif Diao and El Hadji Diouf, and we all know how that turned out.
We paid a lot for him, didn't we?
And you look at we did capitalize in the transfer window, because at that time it was difficult to attract players to the north in general, and any players that wanted to come to the north were going to United, pre-City having lots of money. So for me, it's very much connected with FSG wanted to nurture talent, develop talent, and not spend lots of money. But obviously, Klopp came along and we, what happened with Karius happened with Karius. It was like, look, we need to go out and buy a proven goalkeeper here. And same with Van Dijk. We need to go out and buy quality, because ultimately buying the right quality, if you put a quality player, a world-class player, in with a load of other players, you raise the level automatically.
No question. Buying the best center back and goalkeeper in the world will change your defense overnight.
Oh, absolutely. But you form the backbone of a team then.
Yeah.
And all Liverpool teams have always had a strong backbone, and a few positions are interchangeable. And I think that Klopp has had a very, very specific plan, and it's only just starting to play out.
Yeah.
Well, I think his plan's evolved, though, and I know we've got 500 other topics we said we were going to talk about, including Adam.
Sorry.
No, we're good. Yeah.
One thing is I think he came in. I mean, it's interesting. The stats have changed year on year about how the team plays. From how high they pressed, the number of turnovers they created early on, because his philosophy was that the press was the best form of defense. And of course, it's your best form of defense if you're not really sure about your defenders. But after the 2018 final, I believe he kind of went away and came back with basically said, we need a brand new plan. We can't keep playing like that. It's it's great to beat Roma 5-2, but it would have been fine to beat them 3-0 and be solid defensively.
Do you think that's where the falling out with Bujak happened, Paul? They've never really talked about that. That was very odd, because they were attached at the hip for however long, and they had a big falling out apparently. Yeah. And I kind of wonder if it was like a tactical decision that Klopp made to go away with. I don't know. I mean,
yeah. So I've not heard anything since we talked about this. 2 years ago.
Yeah.
They did show some video of him getting upset at various people, in the months before he left. So it could just have been, they'd worked together for such a long time.
Yeah.
They weren't necessarily seeing eye to eye. But I think the change was with Linda's when he said we need to play differently, and I think that's very much what you've seen. We're losing Gary.
Run out of power.
Oh, okay.
I think one of the interesting things, like speaking of like finally going out and spending money, that we've said is for both So Van Dijk and Allison were both like the most we've ever spent on players of their positions, but in a sense we still bought them low, because you think about, like, we paid the most for Allison, made him the highest goalkeeper in the world until that guy from Chelsea got more. But and then he almost won us the league, and he won 3 gold gloves in 3 different competitions last year. So his price has just gone up from the most expensive goaltender. So
and Barcelona paid twice as much, right, for Coutinho.
Yeah. Well, we kind of, it was interesting. Both of those transactions really did us a double-edged, it was double-edged sword for us. Not only did we get the best positional player in both of those cases, but we also ruined the transfer market for United and City and everyone else who now, so now we need a top-class defender. How much do we have to pay for Harry Maguire? Like, how much do we have to pay for Kepa? So, that was almost a stroke of genius in that even if we did overpay, it was a means to an end, as well as getting the player we wanted.
Right.
Yeah. Absolutely. Should we move on to some of the other topics that we'd talked about? So this is stuff essentially that's coming up on our Facebook group. So if you're watching this and you've got something you want to talk about, then Facebook group is the place to put it out there. There's been quite a bit of conversation over the months about Adam Lallana and his place in Liverpool folklore. Some people not wanting to give him one, and others being, I think, sometimes just to be antagonistic, being like absolutely super pro. Oh, whoa, is that an Adam Lallana shirt I see there?
Oh, you know what? And scarf. Which is so funny because everyone brings it up on the group. Like it's basically just a product of my overcommittal to jokes. Because really the only time it came up is, was it home to United earlier in the season?
Away
United.
Away. So the one tie. And there was kind of a groan that went across the pub when they announced that Lallana was coming on. And I think probably Charlie yelling from the other side of the bar saying, "Hey, what's wrong with Lallana?" And it just kind of turned into a thing, like now kind of antagonizing my wife more than anything, and made this promise that if Adam Lallana scores a game-winning goal this season, that I'm going to have to go buy an Adam Lallana shirt.
So you bought one anyway?
Well, yeah, a new one. It's amazing what you can find on eBay for $15 from the Ukraine. Oh, it's official. Don't get me wrong.
That's what I've seen that on Amazon. Yes, they do tell you it's official.
Yeah.
So it looks like he's obviously not going to come back next year, whenever next year it is.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think like he's had maybe like 1 or 2 moments of looking really great. And other than that, like I thought in the preseason, I thought he actually looked pretty good as like a holding midfielder.
Yeah.
But apparently Klopp disagreed because he got away from that. Maybe because of Fabinho's form earlier on, didn't really need him in that position. And then Hendo kind of stepping in.
Well, I think in the games that he would have played that role, Chirivella actually looked pretty good.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on Adam Lallana, Gary?
Oh, he's out of power.
Without wanting to sound overcritical, it comes down to basically not good enough. I think at the time when he was signed, he was probably the right player, and injuries haven't been kind to him. And it's probably not allowed him to grow with the team in the same way Jordan Henderson has, because Jordan Henderson had just as many detractors around the same time early on, accusing him of not bringing enough to the team. Unfortunately for Lallana, I just think he's missed his time window. He's obviously a gifted technical footballer. You have a lot of his teammates talk about how good he is on the training pitch. And obviously there's something there, otherwise Klopp, he's he's known for bombing people out. For example, Sacco, didn't fit in disciplinary-wise, even though he was a fantastic footballer, and he bombed him out of the club. So I believe that Klopp sees something in him. Unfortunately, he's just effectively made of glass, and he's not a game-changing player. And for me, he's not at the level that we need to be operating at. And I think the best example I can give you of that is a player like Lucas Leiva. Tremendous professional, absolutely dedicated, same as Lallana, but just not quite at the right level for us.
Yeah.
And pace-wise, I don't think he necessarily fits in either, which, Lucas Leiva is also not winning any land speed records. Not that Fabinho is either, but there seems to be some burst. I think that's the biggest kind of knock that there's been on Lallana, at least at Rooney's when we've been watching games, is a lot of times it looks like he's running in quicksand.
So what's always driven me crazy about Lallana, like even when we first bought him, is that when we're on the counterattack, he like slows it down. If you watch him play, and I've never understood that, because it seems like he should be the type of player that would be very good on the counter. But when I watch him a lot of times, it's like he gets the ball and he just holds it too long and does a cork turn or something like that. And then it's almost like he's not able to see the field quick enough to make that quick pass.
Well, he's supposed to be a number 10, wasn't he? He was supposed to be an attacking fielder. And his big problem initially with that was Coutinho.
Yeah.
Because the thing is Coutinho, people forget about Coutinho. If you watch some of the stuff on LFC TV at the moment, some of his goals, you're like, oh my God, this kid was banging him in left, right, and centre. But he had a bit of Luis Garcia about him as well, whereby he would frustrate the living daylights out of you. And Lallana has that in his game to frustrate the living daylights out of you, but doesn't necessarily have the goals to balance.
Yeah. He's actually pretty good in the box when he gets the ball in the box. It's just he doesn't like, I don't know. It seems like he doesn't make the players around him better.
Yeah, and I had the same thought with Coutinho, is that he's really good with the ball at his feet, but he's too good, because by him having the ball at his feet too much, it actually slows us down. And like you say, Coutinho was great for those bangers, but he really did slow the team down as a whole. And, whereas it's all about, the other guys and their movement creating spaces for other guys. But if you got the ball at your feet for too long, then you waste that. And, it's counterproductive.
Coutinho also has a tendency to try to be, I don't know what he tries to do with it, but he takes these long range shots when we're getting frustrated in attack. That used to be the thing that used to frustrate me about him. Yeah. He would take these, shots from outside the box, and almost none of them would go in, but then occasionally he'd make one, and that would be on the highlight reel. But really, he was just wasting possession by taking the shot.
It sounds a lot like Ox right now, right?
Well, there was some really interesting data about shooting from outside the box. And Coutinho's strike rate when he was with Liverpool overall wasn't that great. So for every one of those that found the top corner, there were, a lot of other shots.
One was bouncing down Breck Road as well. Wasn't it?
Yeah. I mean, some of them were way off. It was like a Lovren shot from 40 yards.
I think if I'm correct, there are certain players who have a better ratio than others. Coutinho is not one of them. And Harry Wilson is. And I think Oxlade-Chamberlain may be another. So that Klopp essentially is like to have given him permission to shoot from outside the box, but not anybody else, because ratios.
Matt, I think I've read that Klopp just doesn't like outside of the box shots.
No, he doesn't.
But
the data supports that.
Mm-hmm.
It kills the mood. You boom it into the crowd, kills the mood. They give him the ball back. Yeah, a lot of.
Takes the tempo down a bit.
Circling back to Adam Lallana, I do think there's one thing that kind of gets lost, though. I think that at the beginning when Klopp came in, he was the guy that led the press. And I don't recall. So I know what you're talking about, Sean, in terms of slowing the game down, because that appears to happen now. I don't recall that happening back when, 2016, 2017, when Klopp was starting to create, this kind of different way of playing than they played before. And I think it was that one season that he was out almost that did flip people's opinions about him, so that they forgot the good stuff, and then it became, oh, this guy's never available, and he comes in, and of course he hasn't played for ages, and he doesn't look great.
Mhm.
So I think there was definitely a good Adam Lallana who played for Liverpool. I don't know quite where the Adam Lallana that's playing right now is.
I think one of the other problems that as well, Paul, is he's a bit lightweight. Liverpool don't tend to play with the playmaker in the middle of the field who will either play football against you or boot you up in the air. We've seen, in past years, your Graham Souness's, your Steve McMahon's, your Steven Gerrard's. We don't play with that kind of player anymore. Your closest player to that now is actually Jordan Henderson, who's not afraid to, stand up to people. But that's more off the ball than on the ball. He doesn't shy away from a challenge, but we don't have a hatchet man so much.
Yeah.
And if you've got a lightweight guy in there who can't really hold his own, it does tend to show up if he's getting bullied off the ball.
Yeah,
Robbo's turned into a hatchet man lately, hasn't he? Getting under the skin of everyone.
Well, I think Fabinho was for a while, and he got injured, and he hasn't really been the same since he was injured this season. I think earlier in the season he was doing that a lot, but
yeah, I think you're overall Klopp's built a pretty physical team. Actually, if you kind of go through, even if it's not quite the the dark arts physical, but they're definitely very strong. I can't remember which coach talked about how hard they are to defend from corners because there's so many of them are over 6 foot. They're physically imposing.
Mm-hmm.
How are we doing for time?
I think we're close to wrapping up here.
Okay. In that case, let me just take a quick look at. One other we talked at the beginning about the kind of watch parties. If you're on this, and look out for the Facebook invites to other kind of get-togethers, which we obviously need to call not watch parties if we're not going to watch anything. New names and
a bottle party.
maybe bring BYOB party. Maybe that's probably not a bad idea. One thing we talked about yesterday was if you do know anyone who, if you haven't reached out to anyone who's kind of part of the community, get them to come along. Let's make sure nobody feels that they're kind of alone at this time. I'm sure if you are living alone, which is obviously not any of us, but if you are living alone, then this must be kind of more traumatic, even more traumatic than it is for everybody else. So I guess we should probably sign off then.
All right.
Gary, thanks so much for joining us today.
No problem at all. Thanks for having me, guys.
Okay.
Nice to meet you, Gary.
Thank you.
You sent the link. I'll make sure that we put that on our Facebook page.
Yeah.
Okay, and I'll try and get this on YouTube later today.
All right.
All right.
Thanks
Take care,
a lot, Paul.
everybody.
Thanks, Gary.
See you later, guys. Bye-bye.
Take care.